Welcome back to Let's Talk Adoption. I'm Kim.
And I'm Heather. And, before we dive into today's episode, I want to take just a moment to encourage you with this really reminder about the redemptive nature of adoption. In reading Ephesians 1:5, we're told that God chose us in advance and adopted us into his own family through Jesus Christ. Adoption has always been part of his story of redemption. Redemption, it really just means to take something that was broken or lost and restore it, bringing it back to purpose, belonging, and even beauty. And that's what God does for us through Jesus, and it's also what he so beautifully does through adoption. When you step into adoption, you're stepping into that same redemptive work, creating beauty from brokenness, connection from loss, and hope from maybe what once felt uncertain or impossible. It's not just a child's story being redeemed, it's yours too, and even the birth families, in ways that only God can weave together. So as you listen today, remember this. God's heart for adoption is about restoration. He's writing something beautiful, even in the unexpected parts of the journey. So today, we're going to be chatting about something that every adoptive family who's ever looked into adoption has felt at some point. As you learn more, as you read more, as you experience more, often there's a moment where you say, wait, what?
I love that, Heather, because over the years, I've had families respond that way to
Right.
just things that I've grown accustomed to that are the norm for us working in adoption every single day, where they literally say to me, wait, what? So, yes, as you were sharing, adoption can be beautiful and redemptive. And at the same time, it's also full of rules, emotions, and expectations that can get really confusing, even for people who have been in this world for a long time.
Right. And today we're talking about this from the perspective of adoptive parents, prospective adoptive parents, anyone really embarking on that adoption journey to bring a child into their home. And don't worry, we'll be doing future episodes for birth parents and for adoptees too, because I think, you know, the unexpected nature of adoption, I think that really crosses the spectrum into every aspect. So, but today we're here to bring clarity and hope and answers to those who are beginning the path to adoption.
So, Heather, let's start with the legal side. Adoption law isn't one size fits all. Adoption law is its own little mini planet
Hmm.
in the world of legal services. And every state has its own rules. And many adoptive parents are, and just people in general, are surprised to learn that there isn't a consistent set of laws throughout the nation, but every state has developed their own laws, and that legislation has been developed by the people who live there.
Hmm.
Things like how soon a birth mother can sign consent papers or how long she has to revoke them afterwards. So, one rule of thumb just to understand is there are no federal laws governing adoption, but every state has its own little kind of culture, even though they're all kind of similar in many ways. They overlap in a lot of ways, but there are ins and outs with every state that can kind of make it unique.
Right. And then when you look at the different paths to adoption, through an agency, if it's a private adoption, if it's an international adoption, if your adoption crosses state lines and then becomes an interstate placement,
Hmm.
you know, each path to adoption also then may have its own rules as you look at, the laws of your state, the laws of the birth parent state, or it's required in the country that you're adopting from. And it may feel like you need to go to law school just to understand it all, but you don't. It's just learning um, new concepts that will be important to you for time and ensuring that you have a guide.
Right. So when we say things like interstate adoption, intercountry adoption, having to follow the laws of more than one state or more than one country, please don't let that intimidate you. You just need to be aware that there are different laws depending on the state and country. And you need to have a great partner in adoption who is experienced with intercountry adoption or international adoption or interstate adoption. And once you have someone on your team that's guiding you through this and has been through this multiple times, this is just a normal part of how they operate in adoption, then you'll have that guide so you'll understand what your specifically what your next steps are. You don't need to know the laws of every country. You don't need to know the laws of every state. You just need to follow the steps that pertain to the countries and states involved in your specific adoption. And how those are applied really can differ, like with interstate adoption.
Hmm.
You have her state law, the birth mom state law, and you have yours. And your
Hmm.
attorney or agency will let you know which one is going to be followed in different parts of your adoption. And so you don't really need to know all the ins and outs of every state across the nation. Don't overwhelm yourself with that. And I know, Heather, we often guide adoptive parents just to retain legal services once they do have their match in place, if it's a private
Right.
domestic adoption, so that you just
Right.
have the legal services you need just only for your specific adoption.
And I think that, we're talking about it first today, but it's not the first thing you want to research. In fact, for many families doing a domestic adoption, you like Kim said, you won't need a attorney until you have a match. So the legal aspect, while it's important to know a little about it, it certainly is not where you need to start. Um, Something else that's good to keep in mind that often families don't know, in most states, the finalization of adoption doesn't happen right away. There is a state or two where it does. Arkansas is one of them. But usually the legal process takes place after placement, after you have the baby home, and it takes place over a period of months. For intercountry adoption, again, that's very different. And many times, you'll be encouraged to readopt, which is another legal process after you get home. So the you know legally, adoption law can feel like a maze, but it it kind of straightens out once you are on your path, once you have a match, once you have placement, things will start happening. So, you know, just know that going in, and don't worry about becoming an expert or feeling like you have to know a lot about the law ahead of time.
Heather, as you were talking, a moment that has replayed in my work with adoptive parents over and over is that moment when I'm on the phone or a video call with them and suddenly they discover that an adoption isn't instantly irrevocable just because the baby was born
Hmm.
or just because they had a match with a birth mom.
Hmm.
And they go, wait, what? A birth mom could change her mind? She could choose to parent?
Hmm.
And then they think about finalization and how that's not right away and that could be months later. And then they worry, is she going to have all those months up until finalization and our court date to change her mind and decide to parent her child? And I always assure them that with interstate adoption, and once you know the birth mom state, you'll know how long she has to change her mind. And generally, rule of thumb in almost every newborn adoption in the US, it's going to be within 30 days. There are some exceptions depending on the nature of the adoption, um, but generally it's within those first few weeks or even few days. And then finalization is a formality that comes later. It Finalization is just the date in court where everything's finalized and you don't need to do anything else with the technical side of your adoption. It means birth parent rights are irrevocable. You have satisfied any requirements to meet with the social worker again for post placement visits. That's another wait, what moment. We have to get
Mhm.
visited again by the social
Mhm.
worker. Is she going to pop up unexpectedly when we're at our worst moment? Like our most stressed out moment, we haven't slept, we're not in regular clothes, and the dishes are piled high in the sink and the baby is crying. No, it's not like that at all. It's really just a scheduled meeting with your social worker to ensure everyone is getting the resources that they need after the adoption.
Mhm.
So, couple post-placement visits are pretty customary in most states, and then you just wait for your court date for finalization, which can be a few months, 6 months later. It used to be in the olden days of adoption that it could be a year before a
Right.
finalization date would
Right.
roll around. But now I think people all understand there's not really a reason for that. So, birth parents have legal rights and choices, and in most domestic adoptions, they are choosing you, they're choosing the adoptive family. And so it's just good to know and expect that that is a possibility so that, as we often say in our work, Heather, you hold back a little piece of your heart and you move forward with cautious optimism. But
Right.
those are definitely some wait, what moments. But it's good to just kind of come into this knowing that God is weaving this story for your family
Mhm.
and that you have the right partner guiding you through it and that thousands of families have walked through this path before you.
Mhm. And I think, one other thing I just want to add with this, Kim, is if you adopt through the state, through um, a waiting child that is, currently in the foster system, often that's where the legal services are provided for you, but it doesn't mean it's any less of a maze. It may still take twists and turns. You may not need to find an attorney, but you have the one that'll be provided for you. But I just want to be sure we do touch on that because while uh, the steps you take will be very probably a little more regimented, there still can be unexpected twists and turns as you go through that process. So, um, another kind of wait, what moment is finances when it comes to adoption. I know families often ask, why does adoption cost so much? Or, you know, are maybe surprised to find out that, um, they may need to help a birth mother with pregnancy related expenses.
That's right. Families are often surprised about that. When they hear about pregnancy-related expenses, they sometimes have a wait what moment when they learn that could be helping with her housing, not just
Hmm.
medical,
Hmm.
right? And they often are stressed about medical bills. And um, the good news is most women encountering this moment in her life where she's considering adoption and relinquishing a child voluntarily, they usually either have insurance or can qualify for government assistance.
Hmm.
So just rest assured when you have a qualified adoption professional helping you, your adoption professional can guide a birth mom through and encourage her with setting up those benefits so that there's little to no medical cost in the adoptions that we see. But every state has its own laws about what expenses you can assist with, and those rules are there to protect everyone, especially the expectant mother, and to make sure adoption stays ethical. And so you want to know in advance before you partner with an agency or an attorney, what's their take on helping with pregnancy related expenses? How are those
Definitely.
handled? How are you protected?
Hmm.
Um, so I know we have a
Yeah.
specific way that we guide families, but every
Right.
adoption professional is different. And so you don't want to assume anything.
Right.
Before you sign on with them, find out what their practice is.
Right. And I I think it's good to keep this in mind. Adoption isn't paying for a baby. And i- I think too many times we see adoptive parents, prospective adoptive parents who come into adoption thinking it's a transactional um, thing that happens, and it isn't. It is about The finances are about covering the legitimate costs of the process, the legal fees, the counseling, the social work, the help and assistance. And I really think it benefits adoptive parents to enter into this process understanding that this is not buying a baby.
Right. Understanding the immense amount of dedication that it takes to bring every adoption from that birth mom's first tentative vulnerable inquiry
Mhm.
and her first starting that conversation all the way through to you being an adoptive family who is legally ready to adopt, to getting presented with that match and accepting the match and walking through those moments on through to the placement and the post-adoption support. There is, in most adoptions, there are a lot of people providing services that are essential to your adoption moving forward smoothly and ethically. And don't forget about the adoption tax credit. That is
Mhm.
such an incredible resource for adoptive families. It's good to learn about that at the start as you are planning kind of big picture, your finances for adoption. There are finance coaches that sometimes agencies provide to adoptive parents. So ask if your agency or adoption professional provides finance coaching services for adoption. And if you have a CPA or a friend that's familiar with how taxes work, you can ask them what it would look like for you to apply for the federal adoption tax credit.
Mhm.
And we can provide a link to the federal adoption tax credit information. It's always best to read up on that directly from the .gov site so you get the most
You
current
bet.
info, but it's a little confusing. So it's good to have someone who's experienced with taxes kind of break it down for you and tell you how that would look for you.
Definitely. Because really that that whole finance issue, there's a lot of help and assistance out there. And sometimes it just takes knowing where to look.
And one place to not overlook is employer adoption benefits.
Yes.
Don't forget to look into that. Sure, you might find out that the military gives you 2,000, or let's say you work for Popeyes and they give you 3,000, but you might work for someone else that gives you 30,000 or 35,000. So it's good to look into that. Okay.
Definitely. Let's kind of shift gears and talk about one of the biggest misunderstandings in adoption, and that is the concept of openness, open adoption, contact, what the future looks like. That
Mhm.
really is an area I think that a lot of prospective adoptive parents start the process not really fully aware of what that means or what that looks like today.
Yes, a lot of times families have shared that they don't want open adoption because they're under the impression that it means it leaves the adoption legally open. They think it means co-parenting or that they're going to have shared, visitation with the birth mom, where she's going to take the child on weekends and whatnot. But in reality, openness is about connection, not custody. It doesn't give the birth mom legal rights to the child. It's more about an ongoing relationship that you can have for the benefit of your child. And we talk a lot about open adoption in our episodes. So, of course, you can listen to those other podcast episodes to go deeper into this specific topic, but there are some wait what moments when it
Hmm.
comes to open adoption.
Hmm. And I think one of those is when the subject of visits comes up, because I think instantly we go to visits like visits in divorce, where a child goes to the other parent for a weekend. And I just want to make it very clear that is not what we're talking about when we are talking about visits in open adoption. Visits in adoption are the two families, the adoptive parents and the birth parents. Sometimes it's just the birth mom, sometimes it's more members of the family, maybe it's a birth mom and her children. The two families coming together for a visit. And that can be any number of things. It can be, going out to lunch and spending the afternoon, at a park. It can be, getting together to do an activity together. Um, it is, again, it's the two families coming together to visit. And that is something that a lot of open adoptions see once or twice a year. Open adoption can also be staying in touch through photos, updates, maybe via text or social media. Um, it can also be, just keeping the door open for future contact. Every situation is unique. And I know, Kim, the families we work with, we encourage this to be discussed prior to the baby being born. We really want to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to voice their expectations and come to agreement.
Right. I think that discussing expectations with the guidance of an experienced adoption professional is a key to that going smoothly for years to come. And two episodes that I want to recommend, two Let's Talk Adoption episodes, that go a little more into this topic are
Hmm.
what research really says about open adoption. So that's one episode. And then the very next episode we did was Parenting Beyond Placement, an open adoption journey with Marianne Budden. So I recommend those two if this topic is new to you, because for the sake of brevity, we're not going to dive fully into the topic of open adoption, but we certainly don't want to leave you without the resources and information and the clarity to feel confident about the choices you're making, what you're saying yes to, what you're saying no to.
Right. I want to take a moment to highlight our sponsor, the Lifetime Adoption Foundation, a nonprofit that's doing incredible work behind the scenes to support adoption in lasting, meaningful ways. Lifetime Adoption Foundation offers college scholarships for birth mothers, helping them take that next step in their future after making an incredibly selfless choice. The foundation also provides adoption education so that women and families have access to the information they need to make informed, thoughtful decisions. And through generous donations, they're able to provide grants to help with the placement of children who may face longer waits for adoption, which may include children who are older, part of a sibling group, or have medical needs. Be part of something that truly changes lives. Visit lifetimeadoptionfoundation.org to learn more or to make a tax-deductible contribution today. I think, over the years, one of the most surprising um, things I have seen in adoption are emotions that prospective adoptive parents weren't, I don't want to say prepared for, but they weren't expecting. I think even in the joyful moments, they often discover um, a bittersweet nature to that because as they've gotten to know their child's birth mother and they see her perhaps moving through um, a season of grief in saying goodbye to this child, they discover that their heart for her grew often more than they expected. And, while birth parents do go through grief when they are choosing adoption, that relationship that's developed often between the adoptive parents, um, sometimes they suddenly are realizing while they're thrilled and joyful with this beautiful new life they've been entrusted with, they also are feeling the loss that she is feeling. And that just can be a surprise. I think prospective adoptive parents also, as they begin the adoption process, long before that, may may have the opportunity to, uh, I'll say, re-experience losses, grief they may have experienced through an infertility journey, or previous disappointments, whether that is pregnancy loss or loss from previous adoption. So sometimes I think, Kim, one of the surprises is these emotions that crop up that maybe you weren't even expecting.
Hmm. And that's okay to acknowledge because love, love for your child doesn't erase loss.
Right.
It helps heal it. And this is why we always encourage counseling and having a community around you and having honest conversations about those emotions. Um, and a lot of this work, a lot of this effort that you put into preparing for adoption, of course, is going to happen even before you're in that moment of meeting a birth mom face to face, or holding your baby in your arms for the very first time, or walking through the hallway of a hospital that maybe the last time you were in a labor and delivery, you had a moment that will be in your heart forever.
Hmm.
And maybe it brings that up. So be sure to work through these and address these prior to coming into adoption, and be prepared that they can bubble up a little bit. But if you have maybe even gone to some counseling or therapy over this and discussed this specifically, then you'll have the tools and you'll know where it's coming from. And you'll know what your next step is to keep things moving forward and keep your focus on the very next step you need to take, even though these emotions are coming up in these moments.
Hmm. Definitely. And I think it's just good to remember that, or maybe not even remember, keep in mind that adoption typically starts with loss, and, can be rooted in grief. And I think just keeping that in mind helps us all approach it, even as professionals, with greater compassion and grace and kindness and humility, and even, understanding when situations bubble up a little bit. If, for instance, if adoptive parents, if a birth mother starts saying, "Gosh, I'm not sure," adoptive parents may start feeling, "Oh no, what does that mean?" Again, staying in those moments with that compassion and grace is really going to be everyone in everyone's best interest at the end of the day.
And these are the things that make adoption truly redemptive. Adoption isn't the absence of pain or in and of itself filling the hole in your heart that is left by pain and loss. Adoption is a redemption story for everyone involved, that there is loss and that there is healing, and that this all happens through love. And those words that Heather shared, that grace, that compassion, that humility, and being prepared for this. This is something that it's on a deeper level that well, many adoptive parents are shocked by these feelings, because adoptive parents encountering these feelings have a wait what moment when they've just been focusing on the logistics of adoption.
Right.
And that's why we need to talk about this to prepare you, right? That's what this podcast is about, walking with you through these things and really talking about the reality
Hmm.
of the adoption experience.
Hmm. Another part of that experience is language, the words we use, because they matter. And, this can maybe sound a little nitpicky, but it matters. And after you adopt, you will find that maybe some of them matter even more to you. For instance, real mom. If someone asks you for the first time, well, where's her real mom? Ooh, you know,
Mhm.
just because you're an adoptive mom doesn't mean you're not the real mom. Or maybe someone says, well, why did she give her up? Oh, well, nobody gave her up, but those things can be hurtful, even though people don't necessarily mean harm. It's just the language, probably the best language they know how to use.
Mhm. And so learning about positive adoption language will help you navigate these moments. And it's a
Mhm.
moment where you can help the person, family member, random stranger that's asking you questions out of nowhere. um, you can lead by example and saying, well, her birth mom just wasn't able to give her the life she wanted her to have.
Right.
So she chose us. And we're so thankful because, to be honest, we see how God created this plan and how we're all the answer to each other's prayers.
Hmm.
So you have that moment. If you're up for it in that moment, you don't always have to be this Mother Teresa of adoption, going everywhere and answering everyone with, deep responses. You can shut conversations down and politely decline to share more, but you do have some moments, so it's good to be prepared and to use positive adoption language. I think for me, the most, well, with birth moms too, for her to understand positive adoption language, like how Heather said, it's not giving up, it's
Right.
making a plan, it's creating an adoption plan, it's choosing adoption, it's placing her child with a family. There's
Hmm.
nothing giving up about that at all. So that's one level of why positive adoption language is so crucial, because it prevents us from speaking in a way that's hurtful and confusing. And that brings me to the next person that it impacts is the adoptee,
Hmm.
right? Your birth mother placed you with us, not your real mom, or we're not your real
Hmm.
parents.
Right.
And there are many, many other examples of positive adoption language. You can Google it. You can Google image, little charts that are fun to read and learn about, you know, say this, not that type of thing.
Right.
It's super, super fun. I've enjoyed it.
And just a little tip. You don't have to pick up the mantle of changing everyone's, you know, language and their
Hmm.
paradigm. And that's not something you have to do. It's okay to smile and say thank you when someone says, "Oh, he looks just like you." Thank you. You don't
Yeah.
we don't have to, Kim, when my oldest was a baby, he's a boy. And it didn't matter where I took him. It didn't matter what color he was dressed in. He had nothing pink. Everyone would say, "Oh, what a beautiful little girl." And it was, I mean, I even had this beautiful little outfit that was smocked at the top and it had boy embroidered on it, BOY in blue. And I remember being at the craft store and a woman saying, "Oh, she is just such the most beautiful little girl." And I'm sitting there thinking, "Are you not reading the outfit? Do you think I'm, a crazy mom putting my girl in something that says boy?" And at some point, I quit correcting people because it's just like, just say thank you. It's not my job to have to, you know, make sure that's next. And just as a side note, my second boy, no one ever made that mistake about. So then I was, second guessing myself, is he not as pretty as his brother? But as adoptive parents, you don't. When they say he looks just like you, when you say he has your eyes, when they say, she's she's got your hair, it's okay to just say thank you. You don't have to, draw your sword and fight for positive adoption language with random strangers. It's just it's okay to pick and choose.
Hmm. And Heather, that reminds me, you can also say thank you even to statements or questions that are nosy, invasive, and just plain rude. Thank
Oh,
you.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And, sometimes, well, there's a huge variety, oh, she's so lucky to have you. And you're thinking, no, we are so blessed to have her, which that's a fine response, but thank you works too.
And as your child becomes a little older, you definitely want to explain to the child that sometimes you're responding that way because it's the gracious thing to do in that moment. But ensure that your child understands that, you know, you are the one that feels so blessed that God brought that child to you and that, the reality is, um, you didn't save them in most cases where a birth mom chose adoption and chose you. You were praying and longing for that child to come into your life. So whatever your perspective is on that and, whatever the reality of your adoption story is, make sure that you're instilling that in your child from a young age and that they understand that there are sometimes ways we respond to people in public simply because it's none of their business. And we
Yep,
just want to move on with our lives that day at Piggly Wiggly.
exactly. Exactly. So, all this to say, if adoption feels confusing or adoptive parenting feels confusing, that's okay. It means that you're caring enough to do it right, to want to make the effort to learn, to be prepared, and to ensure you're doing everything you can to 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 do it the right way.
So stay teachable, ask questions, surround yourself with ethical professionals who can guide you. And Heather, I'd like to invite our listeners, if you had a moment of wait, what during this, email us through our show page and let us know what that moment was. Or if you have a wait, what moment that we didn't talk about, whether it's prior to adoption, during, or after, even in parenting, we would love to hear that. So don't be shy. Email that to us and maybe we can make mention of it on a future episode.
And you can reach us at letstalkadoption.com. You can contact, and we read every comment that comes in. So, if this episode helped you, please share it with someone walking the same path and definitely subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, including the upcoming ones where we'll kind of do wait what moments for birth parents and for adoptees.
So until next time, stay hopeful, stay open hearted, and keep learning. Thanks for joining us on Let's Talk Adoption. If you'd like to learn more about today's episode, please visit letstalkadoption.com. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss a conversation. Until next time, take care and God bless.